Jeff, welcome to the ship.
Thank you for having me. I feel honored. That was a pretty intense lead up. I'm
Yeah,
not. I didn't. I feel like I'm so old. I forget some of those things that I've done, but I
I,
appreciate
I
it.
I could be your hype man. I could follow around with you. If I had an instrument, I could play like a little horn or
I
like do
like
like
it.
theme music for you in places.
I
Uh,
like
I,
it.
I
I like it.
yeah, I was actually thinking thinking to myself as I was introducing you, and again, your amazing, amazing background. And I've done a couple things over the years, and right now I have my in laws visiting, and one of my primary skills. I'm not sure my parents and in laws know exactly what I do. I think my primary skill right now is I print documents because no one in the building knows how to use any kind of technology. So with my family, I'm like the tech support guy. And I was wondering if I'm not sure still to this day anyone in my family can describe what I do. Does your family know what you
It's,
do?
it's funny. For about 10 or 15 years, my parents would describe my job as working with computers. Um,
Nice.
I don't. I don't really understand what that means. But I guess that's what I do. So when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I work with computers, and that's
Nice,
pretty
nice.
much it.
I think
I
I
think,
think they've worked out I'm at least connected to marketing and sales at some point. So that's good. So we're moving in the right direction. This fulfills a
yeah,
lifelong ambition of mine because apparently when I was five, I told my parents that I wanted when everyone else said, "Would you want to be a fireman, policeman, astronaut?" I wanted to be a quote unquote businessman. Was when I was telling people when I was five. So I guess I've fulfilled that generic dream.
it's better. It's better than me. I mean, people ask me what I wanted to be, and I literally said Indiana Jones. I mean,
In fairness,
I mean,
it would have been pretty awesome to be Indiana
yeah,
Jones.
I agree. I mean, I went to college. I was an anthropology archaeology major when I got to
Yeah.
Wisconsin, and then I realized that Indiana Jones was just a movie, and I would never have the whip and the gun and traveling to Egypt and looking for the Ark of the Covenant. It's very sad.
You,
So I
you,
decided,
you,
what's the next best thing? Let's get an advert. Let's go into advertising. That's
close enough.
perfect.
It would be great
Yeah,
fun though if you could convince people that Indiana Jones was a documentary. I'm just saying.
I know. I agree. I
so,
agree.
so Jeff, there's so much stuff that we can talk about here. I think before we dig into any of that, I obviously talked quite a bit about some of the roles you've had, but can you describe a little bit more around just your background and kind of maybe your evolution, how you come up
Sure.
through this professional services world?
Sure. So when I was, I guess, 13, I got a modem for
Nice.
my bar mitzvah, and I got online and I got obsessed with it was CompuServe at the time, but I was like obsessed with what the internet could actually do and what it could deliver. Communicating with people around the world, finding documents, weather, movies, everything. And then when I got to college, I put our college newspaper online. I hand coded it in HTML. And then when I left college, I started in the internet startup world, working at a bunch of web development shops until luckily I got a call from DDB in New York to help them start their DDB Digital. I know you mentioned you alluded to Tribal. It was DDB Digital. They didn't really even have it, and I went to New York and worked for them there, and then in Chicago as well. Ended up then moving over to Leo Burnett, where I worked for. It was chemistry, and then iLeo, and then ARC, and then now it's just Leo Burnett.
These
Uh,
agencies certainly specialized in
I
rebranding
mean,
themselves every 2 years, if nothing
it was,
else. So.
yeah. I mean, exactly right. Like, so, and then I ended up moving back to New York, going to Ogilvy Interactive, um, both in in New York, and then in Chicago. Got pulled back into Burnett, but I think there was a guy, Sunil Radia, who you had on your show, called me. He's like, "We're doing something special," so he suckered me back to Burnett for 3 years or so. Then had the opportunity to run a company called Digital Kitchen, and it was my first foray saying, you know what, I'm going to leave the large scale agency where I'd been working within like a, as like a stepchild doing
Mhm.
digital work, and basically running an independent production shop that was doing like high end Hollywood work, where I was lucky enough to get to help launch the Cosmopolitan of Las Vegas. So we did all of the all the content and branding for them. I ended up winning a Grand Prix at Cannes for that work, which I was
Very
very,
cool.
very proud of. And then Bob Greenberg calls. And when Bob Greenberg calls, you answer the phone. And then when he
Yeah.
says, I want you to run my Chicago office, you say yes. And then he brings you and you talk to Nick Law and Barry and the whole team. And you're like, whatever you want. I've
Yeah.
been following you my entire life.
Yeah.
From all the movies you've ever made to changing the way that people go online to building things like the Nike Fuel Band and Beats
Yeah.
Music. I was like, I'm all in. So
Yeah.
I did that for about 7 years. So it was
And
great.
just to set again tone, we're talking about groups that could be 100 people to hundreds, or maybe in some cases even approaching 1,000 or more people.
Yeah. Yes.
So
So I mean, and when you build these groups out, it's very interesting. RGA had a very interesting approach, and they actually started doing groups within the larger New York office because they realized they were getting so large. They had to actually pull it into different, almost like mini offices within their New York office. So for us in Chicago, we went from about 11 people to almost 100. So we had basically a built out group like they have in New York here with every type of offering
yeah.
that the agency had.
So,
It
so
was awesome.
I think we got a home run on kind of establishing serious credibility on this front. So now with that, away we go to speak. So,
Sure.
um, it's O ship. So I love hearing about things gone wrong. We're going to save your O ship story for a moment, but from now. But I'd love to get a sense of what's your take on the easiest way to fail as an agency. How do people? Where do you see people go wrong the fastest?
For me, I think the easiest way for fails were for people to think that prior success is a roadmap for future success,
Mm,
when in fact it is
I
the
love that.
complete opposite, right? Like everything that you've done and you've succeeded in the past has completely changed. It used to take decades and then years. Now it's months, almost days and weeks. So things that were working previously don't necessarily work the same in the future
How
at all.
much is that impacted, in your opinion, by the size of the company? So, like, does that rule apply, change, like, as you start to scale? I have an opinion on this, but I'd love to get yours. Yeah.
Um, I think some of the larger, more traditional plays into this understand that, and while it might seem easier for them to do that, it's significantly more difficult, especially when you have large scale operational processes that are built into how people are working, how P&Ls are set, how the creative teams are built, and understanding that there's past histories that need to really think about new ways of approaching and solving clients' problems. And when you're in a service business, you're basically what you're selling are people's ideas and approaches and processes to how they're going to deliver value to those clients, consumers.
Mhm.
And the more people you have, the more diversity you have into it, which is great. But you also sometimes have more rigor because they have to figure out ways to manage those large groups of people. In
Mhm.
the smaller areas, you might be more nimble and you can make changes more rapidly, but you don't have the larger diversity of thinking that attacks
Mhm.
those problems.
Yeah, it's one thing, you can scale a product business when it doesn't involve humans, but at the second the human element comes in, there's all these dynamics that you can't program your way around, you can't engineer your way around. I guess there's social engineering. So one of the things that quotes has always had a huge impact on me since the first time I heard it was quoted from Ogilvy in one of the books about him, saying, how big can you get before you get bad? And in your experience, and I know it's not uh, totally prescriptive, but where do you think people need to start reflecting around, the maybe how to rethink their company at different sizes? Is there points where you feel like the kind of vibe changes a little bit? You have to think about the organization differently.
It's interesting. It's I've been at multiple different sized companies and I've seen
Hmm.
them grow. I think the main differentiator that happens is really, when the size becomes around 50 people, you then start needing to hire managers and almost middle managers to manage the amount of work that are flowing into the agency to keep it profitable. So when you have that specific level of size at 50, it becomes, you need to step it up, and your leaders need to figure out how they're able to distribute their work and their thinking and start growing the teams underneath them versus actively working on project-based work.
Mhm.
And then when you get to around 100, more than likely what you're doing is you're scaling up capabilities to figure out how to bring and grow the relationships with your clients. So in
Mhm.
the past, you might be a design company or a digital company. Now all of a sudden you're bringing in production, actual content production. You're bringing in media buying, actual media buying. What does that look like? And then you're able to scale. Once you get above 100, then you start needing to think about how are you carving it up into groups and then putting mini leaders on top of that.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things I think is really interesting. Uh, there's like the operational side of scaling, but I'm a bit of a culture nut, as you know, and I think that the cultural scaling gets particularly hard around 100 people, and I think a lot of that just you get to this point where you don't know everyone. And I think and when you're in these boutiques and smaller shops, whether it's consulting from a creative agency, in the earlier stages, you know everyone. So people talk a lot about like that feels like family kind of thing. But there's another side of it that I think is more less clear than, let's say, that feels like family vibe, and I think it comes down to trust. And I think when you're at a smaller group, you trust all the people in the company because you know them. You said, I've worked with them, I've experienced them, I know them by reputation. I think they're going to be great. But when you start getting to hundreds or even multiple hundreds of people, at that point, the members of the group, the people in your team, they have to start trusting the system versus trusting each other. And that's a really interesting thing to build into a professional services company, whether that's training or a belief system. So having people really aligned around the same set of cultural values, or again making sure that they know that the recruiting process is really hard so that people know that they're really good talent there, because at some point you start having to giving parts of your work to someone you've never met before, and that's really scary, and it can really and then if it fails, it really frays at the culture of the company, in my opinion, because people are like, I don't know if I want, especially if you're a very craft oriented company like you've worked in many times, where it's like, you're dropping A grade stuff all day long, and someone drops the ball in the line, then you start wondering if you want to be there, and it can really fray at the core of the company.
I agree. It also comes down to a true understanding of what your offering is,
Mhm.
and I think a lot. It's interesting. I remember at one point Bob Greenberg would go and he would ask people, even in the elevators, what does RGA do? And he kept on getting different responses to
Mhm.
those answers depending on who he spoke to. And I think that's okay because there were, 20 different offerings. They had a venture arm, they had consulting, they had all these different things. But ultimately, how you're working and what you're looking to deliver and rallying teams around that is core. Because if you don't have that North Star, people can get lost, and they really
Mhm.
can't be held to specific, as you're saying, a level creative or thinking, which is super interesting. But what I love though is even as we grow larger, technology has really changed the game.
Mhm.
If there's with how the pandemic has really forced us to not be in an office, how we engage with each other, whether it's a 5-person shop, 100-person shop, 1,000-person shop, we now have the ability to connect in a much different level, and actually work cross region, cross office in large groups, which is I think is a pretty positive thing.
Yeah, I'm actually I definitely want to jump into that a bit more. And briefly, I do want to acknowledge for those of you who maybe don't come from the marketing and creative services world, Bob Greenberg is the founder of RGA. He is a absolute legend in the industry. He's also kind of a quirky guy, respectfully. And I think if I was in the elevator and he was my boss and he turned to me and the founder of any company suddenly pop questions you, what do we do? I think I would mildly crap my pants a little bit. Like, is this an employment test? Imagine it's like Steve Jobs just randomly turning to an employee in a lift and going, "What do we do?" This is it could be a little intimidating, I guess, but it's actually pretty cool as well as a leader that he was checking the pulse of that. So I'm sure that I'd probably get multiple answers about Chameleon Collective as well. So very, 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 very interesting. So you've worked across a lot of different parts of the industry. You've been on the agency side. You've done I think things that fall more on the consulting side. You've also built things that are in the in-house side of it. So you've been a CMO before. I actually didn't even acknowledge that early on. You basically built what it would be perceived as an in-house creative services group for Kimberly Clark. Um, I guess is there any of that? I'm going to start on the easy side. Is any of that been more
Sure.
fun than the other? I mean, like as a journey for you?
Yes, and to reiterate, the in-house offering at Kimberly Clark was there before I got there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When I was there, my focus was also how does it work, how does it move from a center in the U.S. based offering to a more global scaled offering, and what does it look like? For me, it was unbelievably exciting because what it allowed me to do was travel around the world, really think about culturally at a 75,000 person company. How do you grow and scale marketing and branding across multiple types of products in multiple types of industries on 170 plus countries? So for me, trying to figure that puzzle out, figuring out what does that global partner look like, understanding how that comes to life was, to me, one of the most exciting moments of my life. Maybe it's because it's the most recent, and when you have something that's more recent, it sticks out more than others. But I think that was really, really, really special.
Uh, I'd love to get your take is from the less about the kind of operational and hard side of it. Who has more fun, the agencies or consulting firms?
It's not even a question. Agencies. I mean,
I
literally,
mean,
it's not even a question.
are the consultants as boring as people? Is it a stereotype, or is it just some firms? Do you think?
Um, I think it's really the approach of the consulting firm, right? Like when I show up, I'm wearing the same black t-shirt, black jeans. My flair is the sneakers on my feet. Um, you know, I'm much more relaxed. I'm much more inclusive. I'm much more thinking about how we're going to actually dig in and get something done, what the creative vision is. Where a lot of times, from a consultant perspective, they're worrying more about the flywheel. They're more, they're looking at it from a much more um, business school rigor type approach than the musician, artist, free spirit that's going to come and think about what's going to be culturally interesting for the consumer. So agencies every day of the week.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story from who's another guest of Ship at one point, Gaston Lagorberu, that when he sold his agency to Sapient, who at the time was a really like hardcore, consulting firm, and that they had kind of loosened up at this one point where people finally started wearing, which was wild for them, kind of like jeans. And and yeah,
Crazy.
exactly, yeah, exactly, crazy stuff, and it's kind of button down shirt kind of stuff, and ditch the jackets and the ties. And then basically that was all good until they had one bad quarter of like revenue, and the CEO is like, everyone's putting khakis back on in the suit. It was clearly the jeans that tore down our culture. so,
Exactly.
so,
Business
so
casual.
yeah,
Oof.
exactly. So let's jump a little bit more to the client side for a second. What do you think is the key to building great long-term client relationships?
Um, I think it's the really what's keeping them up at night. So if you look at understanding their business objectives, understanding what's going to keep them um, relevant in the marketplace, I think that's so hard. I think there's been such a long history of traditional advertising and marketing where people are like, okay, we're going to sell them a TV spot and then we're going to go stay at Shutters and shoot, in exotic locations, and we're going to do post in London. And like, that's where people were really getting, building those relationships, because you were on production, you were on the ground, you were basically living with these people. Now it's, that's not as important anymore, right? Like that I mean, I'm not going to call it fluff, but it was like that excitement is no longer the important piece. The important piece is, how are you bringing them something that they didn't even know that they needed. um,
Mm,
I've spoken to my team about this. We're doing it at Envoy. Is, what are those innovation days? So once a quarter,
mm,
we're not charging them. It's not, it's free of charge, and we're doing, nights and weekends and extra work to invest in innovative thinking for how our clients can approach the problems that we're seeing, that they might just be sniffing, or they're hearing rumblings about, but don't actually understand what it means. So they hear about the metaverse, they hear about Web3, they hear about blockchain, they hear about Midjourney, they hear about all these different innovative things that they might read about, but they don't really understand what the long term impact is. It's our responsibility to come to them with ways that they can connect with that and use that to change their internal businesses, right? Like,
What,
that's the key.
why do you think when people are looking at building in-house talent, and obviously different company organizations have a lot of very clever people on the inside, why should people look to an outside expert versus an internal expert? What do you think are the key benefits there?
That's funny. I've had this conversation almost daily. Um,
Mm,
I think what you have is, and I brought this up before, it's diversity of thought, it's diversity of talent. What you have are people that are thinking about multiple different industries, multiple different products, and they have a very diverse approach to how they're solving problems. A lot of times when you're internal, you're so focused on what that brand or company is. You're very deep and knowledgeable of what they actually have to offer, that it sometimes makes them blind to everything else that's happening in the world.
mm,
Um, I remember I was working with the Cosmopolitan of Las Vegas, and we were having this conversation, and someone brought up, well, the Bellagio is doing X, Y, and Z. And, the CMO at the time, um, she's like, Lisa Marchese is her name. She's like, that's not our competition,
mm,
right? So then we had a really deep conversation. It's like the competition is Banksy. The competition is what's happening out in the world. You're building a brand that you want people to talk about. You want it to be culturally relevant. You want to give them something of value. You want them to feel cool associating with, right?
mhm,
You're not really competing with the hotel next door, because then
mhm,
then, then you're on a different playing field versus changing the way that people think and feel about your
mhm,
brand and product.
mhm.
So I
I
think
love that.
that's a key piece.
You know, Ken, both you and I have sat on both the professional services side and been CMOs and been on the brand side multiple times. And so the inverse to this that I sometimes experience is that when working with external professional services firms, which again I've been on both sides of this coin, they sometimes have a very narrow view of maybe one specific discipline or one specific expertise, and uh, that I find that they're looking at through maybe through their function, and they don't understand the full like operations of the industry or the business, and so I'd love to just kind of get your reaction to when someone has that kind of negative perception of the professional services world. What is there a counter to that, or is it more about rewiring how you think about the whole relationship, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's more about rewiring the relationship. It's more about that services group being, putting the rigor in, and being focused on really understanding the holistic needs of what those clients are asking for, even if they just come to you for a website, or we do executive business center, like full engaging build outs of digital installations for Fortune 50 clients.
Hmm.
Even at that level, really understanding what the business need is, because every single touch point needs to be laddering it up to those business goals and the brand goals and the brief that you're giving out. I mean, you asked me a question earlier about like my oh shit moment, and I'm gonna
Hmm.
drop it on you right now if that's
Yeah,
okay,
bring it, bring
because
it.
it's pretty it's relatively connected to this ask. Early in my career, I was director of production at Tribal DDB. We talked about that, and my client was um, Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser. We actually did the What's Up campaign that people today have no idea what that is. Like, I was in a Northwestern class and talking about that, and they had no idea. Anyway,
The
we
cultural
were.
classics. How do these people forget?
I mean, people don't realize. Yeah, like that was. I mean, that was like the first. I think we won like a gold, the first like gold pencil for like the What's Up website that we did,
Yeah,
because we
that
did
was
a
a
whole
moment.
digital build out. Yeah, I mean, it was a moment. I remember a client called me and was like, during there was a meme that was circling around for. With Super Friends all doing What's Up, and the CMO called me and was like, "You need to take that off the internet." I'm like, "No, no, what?"
You're like,
They're
this is
like,
the
"You
best
need to
thing that ever
take that
happened.
off the internet." I'm like, no, no. You want this, and B, we have no idea who made this. Like, this is the best. Like, you should be spending millions of dollars for these impressions, and
Yeah,
just let it
yeah.
go. But anyway, we were celebrating the What's Up camp, like, success, and we go out to a bar in Chicago. I'm still relatively young, and they order a round, and dummy orders a Guinness. Okay. And this Anheuser-Busch was not associated with Guinness at this time. It was like in the 90s. And all of the Budweisers come in one Guinness. And the clients are all like, "Who ordered the Guinness?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I didn't realize." Like, at that point,
Knock it off the
I did.
table, throw it at the
I
bartender.
didn't
Be
realize.
like, how did you
So
do that?
I owned up. I owned up to it. I'm like, I did. They're like, "Oh, cool. You like Guinness?" And I was like, "Oh shit." So they then, for the rest of the night, they must have ordered 20 rounds. Every time they ordered a round, they ordered one Guinness. So they're like, and that Guinness had to be drunk. I know you're not supposed to haze clients anymore, but this was back when hazing was, I guess, fine. Um, and I drank about 20 pints of Guinness. I mean, I mean, after the fifth one, I'm like, this is not going to be
Not
okay.
healthy. Yeah.
So that taught me two things. One, like, don't drink that much Guinness because it was brutal. But two, understand the mindset and the product. Like, everything that you're doing when you're with this client or thinking about this client
You're in
needs to
their
be
world.
around around
You're
that
in their
brand
world.
and
Yeah.
around that offering, and seeing how it lives out in bars in the world. And like, don't don't try to be cool and do something different. It was
You got you
terrible. So
they want they people like real serious brand clients. They want you to drink their Kool-Aid, or in this case drink their Budweiser. But I think it's like you gotta be all in on them.
Oh,
Um,
and I
that
was. It
that
was, and they remembered it, and you know what? They were actually very kind about it, but it was a lesson for me to really think
mm,
about, like, what you say and what you do, especially in a services industry, has a significant impact on your relationship.
yeah,
And I mean, they continued. The trust lasted. I still
yeah,
talk to
yeah.
my clients still, but it was a life lesson.
It would be very hard to work for a company where you weren't didn't like their products, because you'd have to lie about it, and because they want people that can lean in on them. I can't imagine anyone ever working with someone who couldn't say that
Mhm.
they leaned in behind their product. Yeah, I want to go back to the conversation we were having a minute ago about what makes more sense, right? The third party subject matter expertise that comes with a professional services firm, the diversity of thought that comes along with that, and the kind of insight that you can get versus building an internal team that has lots of accumulated knowledge, particularly over time of an industry, and really understanding all the operational nuances of a business. And this is a common theme for me that I like to put out there to the world. I feel like in our society, or whether just a cultural norm, there seems to be this kind of desire for people to have binary points of view, this or that. A lot of times, when you look especially at like market research, and you use market research to try and decide, does a consumer like this or that? And I don't think it is about these absolutes. I think it's about percentages, a percentage mix, right? And so I think if you were a marketing leader out there, and you are not on the agency side, or even if you are on the agency side, thinking about how you can talk to your clients, I think telling them the answer is not either or. It is, you want a mix. You should design a team structure that gives you the best of both worlds. For anyone who's a sports fan out there, or it's like you need these complementary positions to get a really robust team. And I think Jeff, you were totally spot on by saying the diversity of thought that comes from professional services company, the fact that they tend to be specialists. I think when you go to a professional services firm, you get these hyper functional people. It's very normal in a professional services firm, whether it be an agency or a consulting firm, to find someone who does one thing, and they do it a ton of costs, a ton of different industries. But then when you go on the client side, or on the brand side, on the business side, you get this person who is the um, marketing manager, or the regional director or whatever, and they actually have to do a lot of functions, but they're very, very, very deep on that industry and that expertise, and they obviously know how that business runs inside out. And so I think if people out there aren't building like a mix of these two things really strategically, you're fundamentally doing it wrong. So in-housing is something I have to be particularly passionate about, because I do believe a lot of this expertise should reside within inside the business. But I'm still not talking about absolutes, and I think
Yeah.
trying to find that is the right way. Any reaction to that out of interest?
I agree. I don't think it's one way or the other. I think if you go absolute, you're basically putting yourself in a box, and you're taking yourself out of the game. Honestly, I think there's one additional area though that also needs to be considered, and that is platforms. And by that I mean the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Reddits, um, the Googles, the Amazons. Those platforms themselves have their own internal teams as well, and
Mhm.
those internal teams are part of their ecosystem to help brands as well as helping agencies really
Mhm.
understand how to use them. This is something that I've been talking about since the early 2000s in regard to what does the internet need for brands and able to deliver brands. Back then, agencies as well as brands were really only thinking about TV spots. It was really the only thing you can manipulate. And is, are you doing a funny TV spot? Are you doing a cut down of a spot? Are you doing a serious? Like, is it an infomercial? Like, that's how they were
Mhm.
thinking about it. And there were very small nuances to those changes. Now
Mhm.
the question is, where is your target? Where is your guest? Where is your consumer? And how are you showing up there, right? You can't just put your TV spot or a print ad on Facebook. You need to build something that's going to build engagement. The same thing goes for Reddit. The same thing goes for Twitter or Google. How you're showing up on those is significant. And the brands need to think about, what do the relationships with those platforms look like? How does that differentiate from the relationships with your agencies, and really figuring out how strategically what you're using those teams for, and how those internal teams need to almost be guides to understand how to work within each. They shouldn't be doing everything themselves. They should be figuring out how to tap into this person from this platform and this person from the agency. And if you have relationships with production companies, how does that come into fruition as well?
Yeah. Um, Very insightful, and I want to pick your brain on a slightly different direction.
Okay.
What about you again? We've mentioned multiple times you've been brand side, particularly even your time with Kimberly Clark. Working on that side of the equation, now going back to the agency and consulting firm side of the equation again. What's the
Yeah.
biggest thing you learned about the agency client relationship, or like did that change
Um,
your perspective? I'm assuming it did. I'd love to know if that how that changed the dynamic for you.
um, it did in the case where it's for me one of the hardest pieces um, on both sides, and I always thought it was hard on the agency side, but I didn't realize how hard it was on the brand side too. Is working with like a procurement team and trying to figure out what that relationship looks like, because you spend so much time negotiating costs, rate cards, hours, who the team is, all of these different pieces um, that could be spent, more focused on what is the thing that needs to be actually developed, right? And I think there's a disproportionate amount of time and focus given in those conversations, because a lot of times these large companies think about service organizations and agencies and consultants as commodities, and treating them the same way that they negotiate to buy their metal to make their machinery, or paper cups for the bathroom, right? Like they think it can just be put up for bid. You go up for the lowest bidder, and you try to figure out how you're adding value, right? And I think those conversations need to drastically change, where you're able to actually purchase based on um, thinking and creative prowess and team members, and not treat quote unquote resources that you're getting from these partnerships as cogs in a machine. And a lot of times that does happen, and it causes significant issues across the board, because then you get sold in something that actually can't deliver on the brief that's at hand, because you went with a cheaper decision, or you cut hours that needed to actually have more focus on it.
It, do you feel like there's respect issues that sometimes kind of exist in that dynamic, and have you seen that change over the years, or do you think it's still working the same way?
Um, Respect in regards to the brands respecting the agencies.
Mhm.
I do. I think, I look and see how CMOs bring in agencies, and it's really a relationship business, right?
Mm,
At that level, once you have these long-standing relationships, it builds trust, and that trust builds respect, because people are able to deliver and deliver and deliver. Um, the unfortunate piece is that, with the life of a CMO at these agencies. I don't know what's the number now. Is it like 9 months? It's like something crazy. It's like, 9 months or 12 months or 13 months with
I
people
didn't realize it
moving
was that bad.
around.
That's crazy.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's short. And what ends up
Yeah.
happening, and this is what I witnessed and what I felt, is that we would build rapport and trust with a partner or a client, and then they move on to a different job, or they bring somebody new, and then the trust is immediately wiped away, because those people weren't in the trenches with the team that worked on it. And then
Mhm.
now you need to rebuild that trust. And what that looks like a lot of times is another RFP, right? It's an
Mhm.
RFP that's going out, and you're basically getting compared to all the other experts that are out there, and you have to start from scratch, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's, having trust with partners is probably the most important thing.
Mhm. It's yeah, a lot of professional services firms, they kind of fall into a couple different categories. So you've got um, uh, I think some firms where they are able to provide inexpensive labor or at scale, so they create depth, and so I think in those kind of relationships where it can be commoditized, I think the relationship can be, I hate saying this, but can be a little abusive at times. In the sense that once I went
I don't know.
brand,
I don't know what you mean.
yeah, yeah. So I've, when I started doing CMO roles about nine years ago, after being on the agency side for quite a while, it was very interesting to me to see how people inside the business would talk about the agency, and a lot of kind of like moments where it'd be like, oh, it's Thursday, and like something hadn't been done. They're like, it's okay, we'll just have the agency do it. We'll give it to them on Friday morning, and it made all these kind of weekend roles that I had experienced in earlier parts of my career make sense. I think the flip to that, and this would be some advice for anyone that's building a professional services firm out there. I think if when you're hyper specialized and you're at the higher end of the market, you're a very, very, very valued resource, and I think the respect equation changes a lot because one of the things I've noticed, at least in the last 7 years since we've been doing Chameleon Collective, a lot of the type of work we do is like bringing in these really, really, really pedigreed leaders who've been the CMO of this, or the chief digital officer of that, or the VP or SVP of this, and we're brought in. And this is another example where I think bringing in a third party is useful. They're brought in to provide that external point of view that may be hard to say internally. I think, and we didn't really touch on this before, but I think there are conversations, and this actually idea is interwoven with a lot of the things we touched on. There are conversations that are sometimes very hard to have with inside a business. There are cultural implications. There is, frankly, political implications, and sometimes you're just too close to the business. And so having someone that can come in and be that expert point of view is essential. And those kind of people I find tend to be very respected and put it nicely, not messed with very much, by the business side. So it's just a very interesting and different dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think earlier in my career, I
Mm,
felt and saw that abuse from
mm,
clients,
mm,
whether it's screaming, whether it's, do it again, late night work, no respect for weekends, no respect for holidays. I think there has been dynamically a change across the board that, to me, that's now um, fewer and far between than it has been in the past. I
mm,
still think there is that late night, you got to get this done by tomorrow, or I don't care that it's the Thanksgiving weekend, or what is Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's? Is that actually a thing? Like, you got to be working.
mm,
I think that still sometimes exists, but almost all of those are around actual events or deliverables that have specific dates, right? So it's, you need to get something built and delivered for CES. Guess what? CES is the week after New Year's. So get
mm,
prepared for that, right?
mm,
It's, Black Friday. If you're a CPG, or you're a digital product, or you're selling something online, you better have everything laddering up to that, right? So
mm.
it's understanding that and preparing for it, so you're not surprised, right? And the good service companies are able to do that. But what's the saying? It's like, you have quality, time, money. Like, choose two, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And you always want and you
Cheap
always
and
want
good.
quality, and you
Yeah.
always want quality as number one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost all the teams that I've been part of, quality
Yeah.
was always one. So the question is time and money,
Yeah, is
and
it
how does
fast and
that?
good or cheap and good? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, very few people are like, well, I guess fast and cheap has its place, but not
Yeah,
for me. Um,
exactly.
so a final question for you. If you were talking to someone today, and I'm not necessarily talking about people coming out of school, maybe it's someone who been in the industry 10 years, they've got expertise. Maybe they've worked for someone else on the professional services firm world, or maybe they've been brand side for most of their career. And they came out today and they said, I want to start a professional service firm. I'm going to get together with some experts, the other experts I like working with. What would be your number one bit of advice for them? Don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I would say the number one piece of advice is really figure out what your differentiator is,
Mhm,
because that there's so much competition out in the marketplace right now. I think what you have is the big behemoths, right? I think you have the Accentures that's going out buying the greatest agencies out in the world. And then you have a lot of these small one-off independent service companies that are trying to make it on their own, but they need to differentiate from the other, you know,
mhm,
50 to 100 that are out there, right? So when
mhm,
you have a service offering, making sure you're very specific and that it's different than all the other ones out there, because then it's going to just come down to relationships,
mhm.
right? If you have a client, that's one thing. If you have a great sales team, that's another. But if you don't have a differentiator, it's almost impossible to get that work.
I love that you brought this up. I'm going to actually just kind of go. I've got a bit of a rant on this subject. So I think differentiating in the professional service space, to your point, is extremely hard. Okay, look, if you go out there, whether you're a marketing services shop, your consulting firm, and you have an expertise. We talked about this kind of functional expertise versus industry expertise earlier. And if you have a functional expertise, someone says, "I do." Business analysis versus business consulting, marketing strategy, brand strategy. There's only so many ways you can say that. So I personally think it's almost impossible to differentiate on a service level. What I think you can do is differentiate on um, how you do it. So your method or your approach or your in our let's say chameleon collectors world or organizational design. The how becomes super important. That scenario you can differentiate around. Your why you can differentiate around. Some people do things because letting some people will lean into letting their passions come through. Other people may have some big social issue they're connected to, so the why becomes super interesting. And then I would argue that you could differentiate on speed, so the when, so to speak. I think that's an interesting one as well. Um, but the biggest thing that I would recommend to people, and it doesn't matter what service you're in, you're only as good as your portfolio. And so, that could be your body of work is everything. Think of you're an artist, it doesn't have to be a creative thing. Your body of work defines who you are. And so when everyone else says, I do this, this, and this, well, they're like, well, let me see it. And so, if you're building a new business in the beginning and you're trying to attract clients, to convince people, unless it's a personal relationship, to convince people to work with you is exponentially harder when your body of work is either not demonstratable or not documented well, or frankly, just not very good in general. So when there's like this leveling that happens that when you pick up a new like big marquee brand or business or a great marquee project that gives you bragging rights, well, now you're someone that does that kind of work. And so anytime you get a chance to effectively level up, even if it's not profitable and potentially even loss making, do
Hmm.
it, because it's like you're like buying that right to be to the next level. And then when you do it, document the hell out of it. If you can't talk about it, it isn't valuable. And so if a client says to you, yeah, they're going to level you up, but you're not allowed to talk about the work at all, it's actually not that valuable to you. And so you need to be able to kind of say, yeah, I'm a company that does this now. And then once you have that, and this is so important, no one can ever take that away from you. So the body of work is everything. That's why even in your career, I think if you get an opportunity to be something on the professional services side or something on the business side, and you can do it for at least a year or two to document that you were successful at it, that levels you up, and you always want to have that, because that's that credibility you're building. So that's my 2 cents there for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. I mean, that's the key if you're starting something, having the business partners and yourself able to talk about it. So you could say, you know, the ECD who ran Nike, or X for Beats, or worked at Google, or did this at Apple, right? Like that work, even if it's not from that specific services firm, the person that you're using, that you're working with, is
Mhm.
key and core to everything,
Mhm.
right? So I
That's
think, and
interesting.
that's your differentiator, right? Like
Mhm.
you're not a cog in a machine at that point.
Mhm.
It's an actual talented person who's either strategic or creative, or has the technical prowess and understanding of how to deliver. That's
Mhm.
key.
Love it. Great place to end this week, Jeff. Again, we could have had this chat for 10 hours. How do people find you if they want to learn more about you, or follow you on socials?
I'm on LinkedIn, so it's Jeff Brecker on LinkedIn, or you can follow me on Twitter at Breck Daddy. That's a whole
Nice.
nother story how I got that name, which was created. That was an AOL Messenger name from like 1997 that just turned into Twitter when I got on
Yeah,
Twitter like
it's
2007 or whatever that was.
it's the my embarrassing old username. I used to be like under Solo, which I think was a reference to Han Solo, to connect
Sure.
back to your reference earlier. And I think my DJ name was Mother. That's another awkward one. But my all-time personal favorite was one of my colleagues. We found out that his email address was partyboy1983 at what mention what service, and we never ever let him live it down. So your Breck Daddy's not that bad, Jeff. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in today and in the past for Earthship. Thank you again for tuning in every week. We really enjoy getting to have amazing guests like Jeff on. The best thing you can do to support the show is give us a like, follow or subscribe, or even share it on your socials. We hope you enjoy, every week of Earthship, and really hope you enjoyed this week chatting with Jeff. Jeff, thank you again for being on our ship. That was great fun. Look forward to having the next one over a Guinness, apparently. And we'll
Never
see you.
again.
You're done. So,
Budweiser only.
yeah, smart. Take care, everyone. See you next week on our ship. Bye bye.